"Give back what you've taken, Venus," Judith, my stepmother, yelled, her voice bouncing off every surface in the enormous ballroom. "You pilfered what rightfully belonged to my daughter." It seemed as though the crystal lights hanging above us lost some of their brightness as everyone present turned their gazes in my direction. I stood there completely still, my heart hammering, and the champagne flute nearly fell out of my hand. I'm Venus Carter, a pianist who's 31 years old, and I never imagined I'd be in charge of my father's factory. Just 60 minutes before, I had entered the Westbrook Hotel ballroom for Judith's gala celebrating her 55th birthday, and I truly hoped to smooth things over between us. It's been a year since my father died, and the strain between us has been almost unbearable. I had started to think maybe she was finally willing to put the past behind us when her invitation showed up last week. Boy, was I wrong. This wasn't an offering of peace. It was a trap. Judith continued, moving quickly in my direction as hushed voices spread through the guests. That business was meant for Pamela. You took advantage of him when he was ill, even though your father created that company for his children. I anxiously looked around the room, trying to find someone who looked kindly upon me amongst Houston's important business people. I'd been working alongside these people for months now. They were customers, providers, and leaders in the community who had appeared to hold me in high regard. A combination of disbelief and increasing disapproval now filled their gazes as they looked in my direction. But I replied, "That's not what happened," though my voice was barely audible, even to myself. My father's last will and testament was pretty straightforward. His desire was clear. He wanted his actual child to inherit the business. Judith interrupted me, specifying that he didn't want his adopted musical prodigy who barely came around to see him. I felt tears starting to form as her cutting remark struck their target. For several years, I had worked as a touring musician, and it was true, I probably hadn't been home as often as I ought to have been. I constantly carried the burden of my regret, but to have that flung in my face in front of everyone was crushing. Behind Judith, I saw my stepsister Pamela, with a self-satisfied smile on her face. While Dad was still alive, she never expressed any interest in the company whatsoever, yet now she was agreeing with every word her mother was saying. "You know, she has a point," someone whispered from a table nearby. "It always struck me as odd that she only showed up after Thomas got sick," another voice chimed in. As more voices joined in, the room felt like it was shrinking. Someone even booed me. In just a few short moments, the murmurs had transformed into a surge of open animosity. "I believe it's time for you to go," Judith stated, her voice now composed, reflecting the assurance of someone who knew they had emerged victorious. "Nobody here wants a crook at this party." As I headed toward the door, my legs shaking uncontrollably, one idea solidified in my head. I wasn't going to allow this to happen, not on this night, never. Before the tears finally burst forth, I managed to make it to my car. Huddled in the dimly lit parking lot, I gripped the steering wheel, my body shaking with uncontrollable weeping. The shame felt like acid, eating away at me. These folks weren't just anybody off the street, you know? They were the movers and shakers in Houston, people whose good opinion I'd spent the last year busting my butt to get. My dad, Thomas Carter, had started Carter Manufacturing from scratch more than 4 decades ago. He'd wed Judith back when I was 15, bringing her and 12-year-old Pamela into our family after Mom passed away. As long as Dad was around, Judith acted like the perfect, supportive wife, but things did a complete 180 after he got his cancer diagnosis 3 years back. I can still picture sitting next to him in the hospital while he held onto my hand. "Venus," he'd said, his voice fatting but still firm, "you've got a head for business that Pamela just doesn't have. She's bright, no doubt, but she couldn't care less about Carter Manufacturing. You do, though. I've watched you dissect everything, how you grasp the nuts and bolts of how it all works." Then he squeezed my hand real tight. "I'm entrusting the company to you, and I need you to swear you'll look after it." I'd walked away from my life on the road to keep that vow. In the beginning, when the will was read aloud, it seemed like Judith and Pamela were all right with his call. But before long, the sabotage started, quietly at first, and then more and more out in the open. What happened tonight was simply the public finale of a year-long effort to ruin my reputation. As I dabbed at my eyes, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Bernard Wesley, my father's lawyer of many years and the one in charge of carrying out his will. "Just got wind of what went down. You doing all right? Give me a ring." I called him right away, and my voice was still trembling as I went over everything that had happened that evening. "This simply won't do," Bernard stated, his usual deep voice resonating with frustration. "Judith is fully aware that your dad was completely lucid when he put together that will. We even possess recordings of him going over why he chose to do things the way he did. She's challenged the will in court 3 separate times and failed each and every time she appealed. They're all siding with her, Bernard," I murmured. "Everyone in that room is under the impression that I'm some kind of scheming swindler." A moment of silence hung in the air before Bernard posed the question that would alter the course of events. "Do you happen to have your computer on your person?" "It's in the back of my car," I answered, taken aback by the unexpected change in subject. "Excellent. Come see me at my workplace in half an hour." If Judith intends to make this a public spectacle, then let's ensure the world receives the complete narrative. Every paper, all the court records, every single bit of proof your father set aside specifically to shield you from this kind of situation. Since I bolted from the dance, it was the first moment I experienced something beyond sheer embarrassment. A glimmer of resolve began to glow within me. "I'll be there in 20, I responded, turning the key in the ignition. Bernard's office still had its lights on when I drove into the parking area of that downtown building made of glass and steel. As soon as I arrived, he let me in, and I saw him in a room full of piles of folders and papers. "I've been putting these in order ever since your father died," he commented, indicating the documents that were labeled clearly. Thomas was aware Judith might attempt something along these lines. He had a knack for strategy, constantly considering what might happen several steps down the line. While Bernard was pulling files, I was walking back and forth across the office, my embarrassment gradually giving way to irritation. I just can't figure out why she would choose to do something like this in such a public way. She already fought the will in court and didn't win. What is she expecting to achieve? Bernard glanced up at me, his gray eyes filled with concern. Influence. Judith has always been concerned with how things look and where she stands in society. If she can't obtain ownership of the company through legal means, she'll try to make your situation impossible by poisoning your reputation within the business world. "She's doing a pretty good job," I mumbled, recalling the unfriendly looks. "Not for much longer," Bernard responded, organizing papers into different stacks. "Your father kept records of everything. All those times Pamela said plainly that she wasn't interested in the business. Those management classes he encouraged you to take online when you were traveling. Those weekend strategy meetings that the two of you would have whenever you were back home." He passed me a USB drive. "This has a video of your father explaining the reasoning behind his decision. He filmed it 3 months before he died, specifically to stop Judith from questioning whether he was in his right mind." I grabbed the drive tightly, thinking about that particular day. Dad was so frail then, but his intellect was still incredibly sharp. Even though I knew about this recording, I haven't been able to bring myself to watch it ever since he passed away. "There's something else," Bernard went on. "Documents detailing the company's 22% expansion under my leadership have been compiled. There are also statements from staff regarding my intervention to avoid dismissals after we lost the Anderson agreement. Also included are the official board notes where I suggested Pamela for a director role, which she refused because the associated paperwork was far too tedious for her. It dawned on me to create a plan. I asked Bernard if he still had that super speedy color printer of his. He grinned back as comprehension began to show on his face. "Yes, it is, and I've got a ton of binders available," he replied. For the next 60 minutes, we teamed up, putting together undeniable evidence that accurately portrayed the events of the Carter manufacturing succession. Bernard made hard copies of court rulings, financial records, and letters from employees. I put everything in presentation binders, so there would be one for each table at the celebratory dinner. While we were working, Bernard contacted 3 of his colleagues, and they committed to meeting us at the hotel. Having these respected lawyers on our side will add weight to what we present. "This night isn't only about demonstrating your innocence," Bernard mentioned as we wrapped things up. "This is about making sure you're secure in your role for good. With this done, Judith won't be able to plot against you going forward." I glanced down to see that it was a little past 10 at night. "The gala will probably still be going strong. You know, I remarked while putting the binders into Bernard's SUV. My dad used to say that in the business world, it's not enough to just protect yourself after you've been attacked. You come back with so much compelling proof that your adversary immediately regrets challenging you. Bernard flashed a grin. I know he would feel pride in my actions tonight. I inhaled deeply to steady myself. Okay, here we go. The trip back to the Westbrook Hotel went by without a word. My pent-up anxiety charged the atmosphere while Bernard made his way through the Saturday night congestion of Houston's city center. Those binders, each representing what felt like my whole existence, my father's desires, the result of my intense effort, my right to be there, were behind me. Don't forget, Bernard reminded me as we arrived at the valet, that this evening you're more than just Thomas Carter's daughter. You embody Carter Manufacturing as its CEO. We emptied the SUV. Bernard's 3 coworkers met us at the entrance. Those 4 lawyers, looking perfect in their elegant business attire, gave off a feeling of formidable strength, an impenetrable legal barrier surrounding me. The doorman who had previously watched me run away crying now moved out of our path with a surprised expression. My chest was pounding hard as we neared the entrance to the ballroom. From what I could tell, inside, the celebration seemed to go on as though nothing had occurred. The tinkling of crystal glasses, the rich scent of designer fragrances, and the familiar melody from the string instruments filled the air. As soon as I crossed the threshold, though, quiet enveloped the tables closest to the door. The quiet spread almost like a ripple as heads turned, and the sounds of people talking faded away. Judith was standing close to the cake table, a champagne glass in her hand, and she looked as if she had already won. As soon as she saw me, her smile disappeared completely. The woman next to her, Pamela, gripped her mom's arm tightly, saying something with a sense of urgency. "Listen up, everyone," Bernard stated, his commanding tone audible throughout the space. "I hope you will pardon the brief break in events. I'm Bernard Wesley. I've been Thomas Carter's legal advisor for many years, and I'm now in charge of handling his will. There seems to be a bit of confusion regarding Carter Manufacturing that I need to clear up." The music stopped abruptly. Every single person in the room turned to stare at us. Bernard went on to say, "Earlier tonight, some pretty harsh allegations were made against Venus Carter, who is the rightful head of Carter Manufacturing. My colleagues and I, in our capacity as legal professionals, are here to present the actual evidence and the documented legal facts." As we made our way to the front, I felt my legs shaking just a bit. While the lawyers started passing out the documents to everyone, I headed straight for the small stage where the musicians had been playing. One of the musicians gave me the microphone. "I was accused of taking my father's business, and it all happened a couple of hours ago," I started, surprised at how calm I sounded. "Someone called me both a thief and a liar." I got booed and felt totally embarrassed in front of all of you just now. I stopped speaking for a moment, looking around the room. A few guests avoided making eye contact, looking down at the floor or the tables. Some people seemed puzzled, flipping through the documents with puzzled expressions. That whole display was put together by my stepmother, Judith Carter, but what she left out is that she's already challenged my dad's will 3 separate times. Bernard got a nod from me, and he then displayed the court paperwork on the big screen behind me. She was always defeated in court since my dad's desires were very clear and had legal power. Judith started coming in my direction, but a pair of Bernard's coworkers easily blocked her path. Before hearing from me, I went on, "I want you all to listen to my father." Bernard plugged in the USB drive to the sound equipment. The screen flashed for a moment, and then my dad was there, thin but with a clear gaze, sitting in his home office. As the image of my father came up, the room became absolutely quiet. Though he was sick, he sat up straight in his leather chair. His body, which used to be strong, was now frail, but his eyes still had a sharp intelligence. Several people made sounds of surprise. Some hadn't seen how worn down his illness had made him in his final months. He started by saying, "My name is Thomas Carter." His voice was scratchy, yet strong. "I am making this statement on March 15th of the previous year, with my lawyer, Bernard Wesley, present, along with Dr. Catherine Wilson, who has confirmed that I am mentally sound." The camera briefly moved to show both of those people before focusing again on my dad. "I'm the person who started and runs Carter Manufacturing. I've decided, after a lot of consideration and planning, that my daughter, Venus Carter, should receive the controlling shares of my company. My dad moved a bit, grimacing in pain, and then kept speaking. I feel the need to explain my reasoning, as I imagine this choice might stir up some trouble after I'm not around anymore. It seemed like he was staring right at Judith, even though there's no way he could have known she'd be seeing this video at her birthday celebration a year in the future. Venus has really shown that she has both the sharp mind and the enthusiasm it takes to run Carter Manufacturing. Even though she's a pianist by trade, she's put in a huge amount of time learning about the company, figuring out how things run, and getting a grip on our industry. I suggested she take some business classes, and she did great, showing a real talent for coming up with plans for the future. Then the video showed little snippets of me at the factory with Dad, checking over plans, talking with customers, moments I didn't even know someone was filming. My stepdaughter Pamela has had chances to get involved in the company a bunch of times over the years, but she's always said no. When asked point-blank, she's made it clear, and I'm quoting her, that she's not interested in spending her life making uninteresting industrial parts. The video then switched to Pamela at a family meal, rolling her eyes and saying those very words, which was followed by footage of her turning down a management training spot during a recorded meeting in Dad's office. Dad went on to say that he loves both his daughters, but a company needs to have someone at the helm who actually cares about it. And Venus definitely has that passion. In making this decision, I want to make it clear that I'm mentally and physically competent. Dr. Wilson showed up on the screen, and with her credentials clearly visible under her name, she validated my dad's mental fitness. My father was staring right into the lens when the video concluded. I have faith in Venus to safeguard what I've built and the means of support for everyone who works at Carter Manufacturing. As the screen went black, I scanned the room. A lot of the guests were now flipping through the documents, their prior critical attitudes replaced by shocked and disappointed looks. After I took the reins, I announced into the mic, revenue at Carter Manufacturing jumped by 22%. We've moved into a pair of new markets, created 17 new positions, and managed to avoid firing anyone, even with the loss of the Anderson deal. I gave Bernard a quick nod, and he put the financial graphs up on the screen. Letters from our employees, many of whom have been working under my father for many years, expressing their belief in my ability to lead, can be found on page 12 of the document packets. I inhaled deeply before speaking further. You can find the official job proposition made to Pamela 3 months back on page 15. It was a high-level role with considerable influence, but with fewer everyday management duties. She turned it down via email, mentioning she had more valuable things to do than spend her time at a plant. I noticed Pamela's face turning crimson as a number of guests started staring her way. The last part, I declared, my tone becoming more confident, includes the court rulings denying Judith's objections to my father's legal will. It was confirmed by 3 separate judges that there was no sign of trickery or inappropriate pressure. The medical records showed that my father was in complete control of his faculties when he made his choice. Setting down the microphone briefly, I took a step forward and looked directly at Judith, who was standing like a statue near the dessert table. I spoke, making sure my voice was audible to everyone, asking you to give back what doesn't belong to you. However, as these papers clearly demonstrate, Carter Manufacturing is precisely where my dad intended it to be, under my control. I grabbed the microphone again and turned to face everyone present. I realize many of you received inaccurate information this evening. You only got to hear one aspect of a complex situation and responded to that partial picture. I stopped speaking for a moment, allowing my eyes to wander across the ballroom. I don't fault you for that response, but I am asking that you take some time to look over the facts that have been provided before you reach any further conclusions. The mood in the room had completely shifted. The animosity had vanished, and in its place was a feeling of awkwardness and shame. Getting up from his chair, Gregory Thompson, the head of our biggest customer, spoke. "Venus, I need to apologize to you," he announced, his voice resonating throughout the space. I should have exercised better judgment before taking such severe claims at face value. It was like his open admission released pent-up pressure. More intently, other attendees started looking through the contents of the binders and started whispering amongst themselves. From a table in the back, someone began clapping softly, and soon others started to applaud along. At long last, Judith managed to get past the lawyer who was blocking her, rushing at me with Pamela right behind her. She spoke in a hushed but spiteful tone, asking how I could possibly do this. This is supposed to be my birthday party, and you've managed to transform it into some kind of business pitch. This just proves why Thomas never should have given you control of the company. You have no grace, no awareness of what's appropriate. I managed a steady smile, aware that everyone in the room was watching us. That's a really interesting way to look at things, Judith, especially considering you used your own birthday to publicly accuse me of stealing and have me kicked out. Pamela jumped in, her voice trembling with rage, saying I'd taken advantage of him when he was on his deathbed. You were hardly ever there. Bernard came forward, holding a tablet in his hands. As a matter of fact, hospital and hospice records actually show that Venus was there to visit your father 83 separate times during his last half year. Using these very same records, Pamela, it shows you were only there a dozen times. And Mrs. Carter, you were there 37 times. Pamela tried to speak, but nothing came out. Judith finally spoke, letting go of all the charades, saying that the company was meant to guarantee their future. Thomas had assured her that they would always be looked after. And you are, I responded definitively. My father's will included very generous provisions for you both. The trusts that he set up guarantee that you'll never have to worry about money. Dropping my voice, I made sure that only they could hear. He chose not to entrust his life's work to your care, understanding the potential consequences. Judith's features twisted into an expression of fury. For a fleeting moment, I was afraid she was going to hit me. She chose, instead, to seize Pamela by the arm and tug her in the direction of the doorway. This isn't finished, she said, tossing the words back at us. Bernard, however, responded, saying, actually, it is. Future legal challenges will be seen as intentionally disruptive and could incur penalties. As their figures vanished through the doorway, the strained atmosphere in the room noticeably lessened. People began coming up to me, giving their apologies and praising the company's achievements. Some conceded they'd always been wary of Judith's account, but hadn't felt safe voicing their concerns. The former chief financial officer, Edward Winters, who had been employed with my father for 2 decades before his retirement, walked over to where I was standing. You lived up to Thomas' expectations, he commented, giving my hand a firm squeeze. You possess his strength of character. He would often remark that you inherited your mother's skill, but also his business acumen. Moisture welled up in my eyes, but unlike before, these weren't caused by embarrassment. Thank you, Edward, those words mean the world. As the evening wore on, I was surrounded by encouragement rather than disdain. Bernard was standing nearby, and you could clearly see he was content. The lawyers commenced to gather the documents. Their purpose had been fulfilled. So, what's the plan? Bernard inquired, as the soiree slowly went back to its usual state. My gaze swept across the room, filled with prominent figures from Houston's business world, many of whom would be indispensable to Carter Manufacturing's future triumphs. I adjusted my posture and announced, now I engage in professional socializing. You see, I'm more than just Thomas Carter's offspring this evening. I now hold the title of CEO at Carter Manufacturing. It's been half a year since Judith's horribly unsuccessful birthday celebration. That particular night was a significant moment of change, not only in the perspective of the business community towards me, but also in my own self-perception. Entering that ballroom once more, armed with proof and the real story, had changed me in ways I'm still understanding. Carter Manufacturing has thrived more than I could have ever hoped for. Following the gala, a number of attendees came to me with fresh possibilities for business. Gregory Thompson's organization requested twice the amount, and 3 previous customers who were unsure about us decided to come back with extended agreements. We've added 32 people to our staff, and we've grown, opening a second location in Austin. The consequences for Judith and Pamela were surprising to everyone. Pamela arrived at my workplace unexpectedly 2 weeks following the gala. She was sitting across from me, nervously fidgeting with her hands. I'm in need of employment, she said directly. Mother has almost completely used up her personal funds dealing with the legal issues, and my inheritance from Dad doesn't become fully available for another 3 years. I carefully examined my stepsister's face, looking for any indication of dishonesty, but only noticing despair. Why would she seek me out, considering our history? Well, she confessed, a bit begrudgingly, it's because you're the only person genuinely doing well. Everyone else in my mother's group is just putting on a show. I disregarded Bernard's suggestion and gave Pamela a starting job in our advertising division. I was taken aback when she said yes, and even more stunned to see she actually has a knack for it. We aren't close and maybe we never will be, yet we're developing a certain admiration for each other professionally. Judith, conversely, departed from Houston soon after the party. As the story goes, she relocated to Phoenix, where she's trying to find a new rich older man who lost his wife. We haven't run into each other since then, and I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. My own life has changed just as much in many ways. For such a long time, playing music defined who I was. The piano was like a friend to me, a constant presence through those lonely childhood years after Mom passed away, through the weird merging of families when Dad married Judith, and during the demanding routines of music school and being on the road. When my father became ill and I stopped performing, I believed I was only taking some time off. However, being in charge of Carter Manufacturing has stirred something new inside me that I never expected. The difficulties of being a leader, along with the joy of generating employment opportunities and figuring out solutions, genuinely gratify me in ways I hadn't expected. I continue to play the piano, usually late in the evening after I'm through with the day's tasks, but my connection with music has changed. It's become more intimate and less about public performance. Just recently, I accomplished something my father would have truly cherished. The newly formed Thomas Carter Foundation aims to give music instruction to schools with limited resources all over Texas. This organization is also set up to give guidance in the world of commerce to budding business owners, mixing the two biggest parts of my life into something really important. At the unveiling of the foundation, I performed for an audience for the first time since I took control of the business, playing the Chopin Nocturne my dad loved the most on a beautiful piano we moved into the plant. Surrounded by those machines my father designed as I played, with the people he helped support and whose lives I now safeguard all around, I felt incredibly close to him, more than I had since he passed. I came to the understanding that what we inherit isn't merely about possessions or being in control, but really about moving forward with the best aspects of those we've lost while also including our own special contributions. The very same group of business leaders that once criticized me now recognizes Carter Manufacturing as an example of new ideas and morally sound leadership. Our organization is doing well. Pamela seems to be figuring things out for herself, and I've come to a place where my creative side and my business acumen work together beautifully. It turns out my father's belief was true the entire time. There are some inheritances you don't just take, you actually have to deserve them.